بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته. Respected brothers and sisters, in our previous lesson, we studied the beginning of life in Medina. When Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam migrated from the city of Mecca to Medina Munawwara, what were some of the situations that the Muslims faced at that time? We spoke about the naming of the city and how it was originally called Yathrib, how the name changed to Medina. We spoke about the climate, and in that discussion, one thing we didn't mention was that the people of Mecca, the Quraysh, made fun of the Muslims after migrating to Medina because of the sickness that they faced. The sickness caused a bit of weakness, and this was a reason for the people of Mecca, the Quraysh, to mock the believers. And when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam returned to Mecca 8 years later, with the Sahaba radiallahu anhum marching victoriously without any altercation, without any confrontation, liberating Mecca, freeing Mecca, rescuing Mecca, conquering Mecca, he instructed the Sahaba radiallahu anhum to make tawaf around the Ka'batullah and to do something called ramal. Ramal is a robust soldier type walk. So when people go for pilgrimage and they make tawaf around the Ka'batullah, for the first few rounds, you make a robust soldier type walk. It's not an arrogant walk, but it's a walk to show dominance. And the reason was to show the Meccans who had previously mocked the believers that we're not weak. Though we may have experienced sickness during the beginning of our migration to Medina, because of changing climate, we're not weak. So this was a sign at that time. Today, inshallah, we're going to continue with the discussion on the foundations of a Medinan society. What were the building blocks? What were the institutional changes? Or what were some of the things that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam implemented after arriving in Medina Munawwara? First, we have to realize or acknowledge or know that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam's arrival in Medina Munawwara, in the city of Medina, paved the way for the first Islamic state. In Mecca, Muslims did not enjoy sovereignty, they did not enjoy governance. They were not the rulers of Makkah Mukarramah at that time. They were a minority group, persecuted, boycotted, and eventually forced to migrate and leave. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam had already paved the way for Medina to become a Muslim society, an Islamic society, by sending Mus'ab bin Umair, Abdullah bin Maktoum radiyallahu anhum, and we studied this previously, to go and teach the people of Medina. Some of the earlier converts to Islam from Medina Munawwara came during the last phases of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life in Mecca. And we know the stories, we've studied them in detail previously. So this is the first time that an Islamic state, an Islamic governance, an Islamic society is being realized in Muslim history. So the riyasah, you can say, the governance of Medina is a very important matter for Muslims to study. What were some of the things that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam did when he first migrated to Medina Munawwara? it was important that he establish foundations. He had to do so. There had to be order. There had to be structure. There had to be governance. There had to be a system. So when we look at the seerah, we see that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did a few things earlier on. And the first thing Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did was building Masjid and Nabawi. Building the Masjid of Madinah was the first thing Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. Number two, he established fraternal bonds between the Muslims to highlight and indicate that the bond and brotherhood of faith is more important than the brotherhood of blood, the bond of blood. It's a very important matter. We can talk about it in detail when we get to that point. Maybe next week, not today. And the third thing Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did was draw up the constitution of Medina, known as the Mithaq of Medina, between the different tribes that resided in Medina, which was also very important. A charter and a constitution that will outline how Muslims will live in that society and how they will interact with different groups. What will their relationships with different groups be like? And we'll speak about that probably next week or the week after. But first we want to speak about the building of Masjid and Nabawi. Building of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's Masjid. Can I have a show of hands who has been to Masjid Nabawi? So can I have a show of hands who hasn't been? Inshallah you will go. Say inshallah. Inshallah you will go. Everybody online who's listening as well, inshallah you will go. Inshallah we will all go again, all of us. It's the best place to be, Ka'batullah and Al-Masjid Nabawi, and inshallah we'll go to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa as well, inshallah. So building of Masjid Nabawi is very important. The place where Masjid Nabawi is built today, remember the story, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's she-camel. When he's traveling from Quba, which was his first stop on his way from Mecca, he said, wherever the she-camel stops, because it is under the guidance of Allah, that's where I will stop. And the she-camel stopped near the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anhu. The land that the she-camel stopped at belonged to two orphans from Banu Najjar tribe. Their names were Sahal and Suhail. Sahal means ease and Suhail means little ease. It's a diminutive noun, like Umar and Umair, like that. It's a diminutive noun. So Sahal is ease, Suhail means little ease. It's a beautiful name, Sahal and Suhail. They were two orphans that were under the guardianship of As'ad bin Zurara radiyallahu anhu. And As'ad bin Zurara radiyallahu anhu was the first to establish Jumu'ah. As'ad bin Zurara radiyallahu anhu. So this area was now identified to be the Masjid. As'ad bin Zurara, even before Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's migration, was praying around there. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam inquires, who does this land belong to? He was then told it belongs to these two orphans. He summoned them. Some narrations mention that he summoned As'ad bin Zurara, who was the uncle under whose guardianship these two orphans were. And he asks them for the land to purchase it for the masjid. They said, we want to give the land for the sake of Allah. These were orphans. They said, we want to give the land for the sake of Allah. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no. We can't take this land freely. How much is the land? Finally, they settled on an amount of 10 dinar, 10 gold coins. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam instructed Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu to go and bring the 10 dinar and give them the 10 dinar. Now, what was the condition of that land? The condition of that land is that it had boxthorn trees on it, disheveled, like just lots of trees, date palm trees, and it also had old graves of mushrikeen, polytheists, old graves of mushrikeen. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam instructed that the trees be removed and the trunks of the trees be placed in line at the front of the masjid. Now remember, what's the front of the masjid that time? Towards Al-Aqsa, because that was the direction of the Qibla. Remember this, okay? Because we're going to mention it again for another reason. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam instructed that the trunks of the tree be placed in line at the front of the masjid. Then he instructed that the old graves be dug up. We're going to speak about this in a few minutes, about the permissibility of doing this, under which conditions, so on and so forth. We'll have this discussion, inshallah, in a few minutes. What material did Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam use for the construction of Al-Masjid al-Nabawi? Very simple, unbaked bricks, unburnt and unbaked bricks as the walls. The tree trunks were the pillars, and the branches were the roof. Very simple. Very, very simple construction. The floor was sand and pebbles. Narrations mention that when there was a heavy downpour, it would become very muddy. One companion even said, "Oh Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, should we not make the roof stronger?" Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "We don't have time. This is a matter of urgency. Building the masjid is a matter of urgency, and we don't have the time right now to make a solid roof. So let's just complete the construction of the masjid." The beautiful thing is that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself participated. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is how old at this time? 53. And he's holding stones, rocks himself. And in order to motivate the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, can you just imagine this scene? Everybody working together. In order to motivate the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say a poem. And this was the poem. هذا الحمال لا حمال خيبر هذا أبر ربنا وأطهر اللهم إن الأجر أجر الآخرة فارحم الأنصار والمهاجرة. Beautiful. This load that we're carrying is not like the load that is carried in Khaybar. And he's saying basically that this is a work and an effort that we're engaged in that is of benefit and reward. This is not just lifting and constructing any old place. Then he says, "Oh Allah, indeed reward is the reward of the hereafter. فَارْحَمِ الْأَنصَارَ وَالْمُهَاجِرَةِ Have mercy upon the Ansar, the helpers, and Al-Muhajira, and the migrants." One version says, فَاغْفِرِ الْأَنصَارَ وَالْمُهَاجِرَةِ Forgive the Ansar and forgive the Muhajira. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum would see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam working physically, and they would say, لَإِنْ قَعَدْنَا وَالنَّبِيُّ يَعْمَلْ لَذَاكَ مِنَّ الْعَمَلْ الْمُضَلَّلِ If we sit here while the Prophet is working, then our work is misguided and unblessed. How can that be? How can Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam be working while we sit here? Never. We have to get up. We have to work. We have to get our hands dirty, as they say. We have to get involved. And the reason why I'm saying we have to get our hands dirty, because Ali radiallahu anhu is saying that. What is he saying? The one who is active in this building, whether they're sitting and doing it, or whether they are standing and doing it, can never be like the one who's avoiding getting their hands dirty, avoiding getting their clothes dirty. And one of the biographers, Maulana Idris Kandalwi in Sirat al-Mustafa, he's writing, perhaps Ali radiallahu anhu is saying that because there was one companion, Uthman bin Mad'un, he's having a play with him, he's playing with him. Uthman bin Mad'un was helping, but he was very cautious about his clothes because he's very clean. You know, sometimes you have brothers mashallah, they look really clean all the time. And I'm sure in the sisters you'll find them. They're always looking sharp. And if you ask them to help out, they're like, oh, I don't know if I can help because, my clothes are ironed and I'm wearing designer label clothes. So Uthman bin Mad'un radiallahu anhu was very clean, always looking good. Not Uthman ibn Affan, Uthman bin Mad'un radiallahu anhu. So Ali radiallahu anhu they're saying he's playing with him. The one who's getting their clothes dirty can never be like the one who's trying to avoid getting their clothes dirty, right? So this is the camaraderie there, the brotherhood, the support for one another, the motivation. This type of relationship is being built amongst the Sahaba radiallahu anhum while they're building together. And you hear these stories from brothers and sisters that have come here earlier on as well and build masajid. Oh, we were such a small community. We were a few families. We came and we cleaned up all the snow from ISB parking lot long time ago. We hear these stories. And those families that grow together like that, they have a very different bond. It's a bond of iman, really. It's not a blood bond. It's a bond of faith because it's Islam that brought them together. Here, I'm speaking about just here in our own masjid 50, 60 years ago, whenever it was built, whenever the brothers, sisters came together. That's a very big khidmah. It's a huge thing. So it reminds me of those times. When you look at the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, what was the size of the masjid? The masjid was approximately 100 feet long and wide. But there are different reports about this. I'm going to mention them inshallah as we go along. The height was very average. The foundation was approximately 3 feet. And the qibla, of course, we know was towards Baytul Maqdis, Jerusalem, which was the first qibla, awwalul qiblatayn. The masjid had 3 doors. There was one door at the back of the masjid, which is the front of the masjid today. Right? There was a door at the back of the masjid, which is the front of the masjid today. There was one door that was towards the west, which is now on the right side, right? Which is known as Babul Rahmah. Okay. So now if you're in Masjid Nabawi, facing the Qibla, the actual Qibla today is going to be on your right. But that time it was towards the left. Because towards the right was Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's apartments. That time. Now the apartments are on the left. No longer apartments, but you understand what I'm saying. So there was one door known as Babul Rahmah now. Babul Rahmah. That was towards the west. And now it's towards the east. And there was Bab Jibreel. Bab Jibreel is towards the east that time, and now it's towards the west, which Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself used to use. Nobody else used to use that because it was adjacent to the apartments of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So I wish I had a diagram, but if we're looking at, for example, we're in ISB's Musalla right now. This is the Qibla, okay? Currently, the Qibla. But initially, that was the Qibla, for example. Okay? So then Bab Ar-Rahmah is here, and Bab Jibreel is there. But now you flip it around. This is the Qibla, Bab Jibreel, Bab Rahmah. Okay, like that. So Bab Jibreel is going to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's rooms. So where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's qabr is, his grave is today, that area basically is where Bab Jibreel was. Now, when 16, 17 months later, when the Qibla changes from Al-Aqsa, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa to the Kaaba in Makkah Mukarramah, then what happens? The door that was originally there at the back of the masjid is now the front of the masjid. That door was closed up. And a new door was built from the back to enter. Now, I was saying that the ulama differ about the size of the masjid, because there are some reports that suggest that the masjid was only 17 feet in length and 60 feet wide. And some reports suggest 100. Why is there a discrepancy in this? So the biographers are saying, and this is what Maulana Idris Kandalwi is saying in Siratul Mustafa, is that there were 2 constructions in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One was the first one now, and then after the 7th year, the Ka'batullah was renovated. Sorry, not Ka'batullah, Masjid Nabawi was renovated. It was rebuilt because some of the date palm trees were getting weaker, so they were replaced. But no new materials were used, in the sense that no different materials were used. The same materials were used to rebuild and reconstruct the Ka'batullah. Now, how do we know that? We're going to mention some of the reasons why we can say that there were two actual buildings of the Ka'batullah. When Rasulullah ﷺ decided to expand the masjid in the second construction, the adjacent land belonged to a poor companion, radiyallahu anhu. Rasulullah ﷺ tried to bargain with him. He said to him that this adjacent land we want to add into the masjid, we want to include in the masjid. If you give it for the sake of Allah, Allah will give you a house in paradise. This poor companion, radiyallahu anhu, said, I'm not in a position right now to be able to give it. It's his right. It's his house. He doesn't have to give it. It's his land. He wasn't in a good financial condition. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam announced, who can purchase that land from this individual? Uthman radiyallahu anhu purchased that land from the individual, and Uthman radiyallahu anhu gave the land for the sake of the masjid. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam placed the first brick. Then he instructed Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu, Umar radiyallahu anhu, Uthman radiyallahu anhu, and Ali radiyallahu anhu. And they all played their role. We're speaking about the second construction, after the 7th year. So this narration is actually weak. But there's another narration in Tirmidhi which strengthens it. And that is from the time of Uthman radiyallahu anhu's caliphate, his khilafah. If you know the story of Uthman radiyallahu anhu's khilafah, at the end of his life, he was assassinated. And he was surrounded, his house was surrounded by rebels, the Khawarij. At that time, Uthman radiyallahu anhu was barred from going to Al-Masjid al-Nabawi. He wasn't able to enter. They didn't let him out of his house. There was an exchange between them. And Uthman radiyallahu anhu says, you know very well that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam announced, who can purchase this land and give it for the masjid, Allah will give them a house in Jannah. And you know very well that I was that man. And this I gave to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be part of the masjid in exchange for a house in Jannah. And now you're preventing me from entering this masjid? That is a sound hadith from Tirmidhi. This hadith strengthens the earlier hadith that Uthman radiyallahu anhu was the one who purchased that land and gave it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be included as part of the masjid. Then there's another narration. Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, when did he come to Madinah? Does anybody know from the seerah, when does Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu come to Madinah? 7th year after Khaybar, right? Around the time of Khaybar, which was in the 7th year. Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu says that one time he saw Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam when they were building the Ka'batullah. He saw Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam holding a very heavy rock, and he said, "Oh Rasulullah, give it to me. Let me hold it for you." Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, "No, you carry another one." So we know from this, because Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu arrives when? After Khaybar. So we know from this that there were two constructions. The original was 17 by 60 approximately, and the second one was larger, about 100 by 100 feet. So this is some things that we learn from here. What I like about that story also is, at that point Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is 60. In the second construction, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is 60 years old, and he's holding heavy rock, heavy stones, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time of the first construction after migrating to Madinah Munawwara had two wives. One was Sauda bint Zam'a radiyallahu anha, and one was Aisha bint Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anha. So only two apartments were built for Azwaj Mutahharat. The land where the apartments were built, and today that land is the qabr and the grave of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu next to him, and Umar radiyallahu anhu next to him. That belonged to Haritha bin Nu'man. he would pledge a piece of land every time a new apartment was needed. He gave it to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whenever Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam married subsequently, every single time he gave more land to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to build or to have as apartments for his azwaj mutahharat. What were they made of? The simplicity. Look at this. Date palm trees, some unbaked bricks, the walls were curtains, and there were no lights in the house. That was the condition of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life. The one who was given the keys of the world. That was how he chose to live. After the death of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wives, approximately 60, 70 years later, when the final wife of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes away, the Muslim ruler at the time, his name was Walid bin Abdul Malik. Walid bin Abdul Malik included all of the apartments as part of the masjid. But this brought pain to people. The people of Medina weren't very happy with that. And one of them, Sahal bin Hunayf radiallahu anhu, says, only if the apartments were kept intact so the latter generations could see how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the one who received the treasures of both worlds, actually lived. Subhanallah. It remained the same during the era of now the masjid itself, that size that we described, the simplicity of the construction, the materials used, this was the same in the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. He never made any changes, except for maybe a few things that needed to be replaced. But he never added anything. He never embellished it. He never remodeled in that sense. Umar radiallahu anhu, in his time, rebuilt it, renovated it, but with the same materials. He never went overboard, no extravagance. And this took place in the 17th year after Hijrah. So we're speaking about approximately, you can say about 6 years after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's passing. When Umar radiallahu anhu is Khalifa and Caliph, during his time he rebuilt it because there was a need. Some of the materials, some of the things became old and weaker. So he needed to re-strengthen the construction or the building of the masjid. He used, and what he did was he increased the front part. Now, if you look at the Prophet ﷺ's masjid today, and you see the mimbar of the Prophet ﷺ and the mihrab of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Imam stands today is in front of that. You know the area that we walk to give salam to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? That part was not part of the masjid in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. That was added by Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu in his time. That area that we walk through to get to the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to pass it by, those few rows that are there to the front of the masjid, those were not part of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's original masjid. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu added it during his time because there was a need for expansion. There was a need for expansion. The community had grown. Uthman radiallahu anhu's time saw even more construction. So Umar radiallahu anhu's time saw expansion at the front and eastward, because they couldn't do towards the left because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wives' apartments were still there. Even though he had passed away, they still resided there. Uthman radiallahu anhu's time, there was new construction. And Uthman radiallahu anhu went a different way. He used engraved stones, whereas previously unbaked bricks were used. He used proper cement. He used strong wood. Actually, the wood was ordered from India, by the way, in Uthman radiallahu anhu's time. Okay. So he used solid wood for the roof of the Ka'batul of Al-Masjid Nabawi. He made it strong and he also made it beautiful. Some of the people, they objected. They said, how can you build the masjid beautifully like this? Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's masjid was simple. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu kept it simple. Umar radiallahu anhu kept it simple. So Uthman radiallahu anhu, he stood up on the mimbar one day and he gave a khutbah. And he says, you guys are raising a lot of objections. I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, whoever builds a masjid seeking Allah's pleasure, Allah will make them similar in Jannah. So if I make a beautiful house for Allah in this world, Allah will give me a beautiful palace in Jannah. A beautiful house in Jannah. So that was Uthman radiallahu anhu's opinion, and nobody censored him after that. Nobody censored him after that. It's an important discussion, by the way, because the ulama, they actually have there's an entire discussion amongst the ulama about the embellishment of masajid. And there are some very strong opinions. They say, إِنَّمَا يَعْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. Imara means to tend to the building. Tending to the building means constructing it, building it. So there's no objection amongst all of the scholars about re-strengthening the building and to use simple materials in making the masjid solid. But some have considered it to be extremely wrong, and some have considered it to be detestable and makruh at the very least, to embellish the masjid and to beautify it. Some say it's okay because of Uthman radiallahu anhu, his action, and nobody stops it. Some say that if the masjid was donated by one individual and he gave all the money and he does it, nobody can object. But if the money is from the waqf and the Islamic endowment, then it shouldn't happen. Then there's a discussion about having verses of the Quran at the front. There's lots of discussion. The ulama go through a lot of details. They're not hair-splitting discussions either. They're actually quite good discussions. And one of the scholars writes that beautifying the masjid, and this is I know that we live in 2023 in the West, and of course if we look at other places of worship, then Muslims should have something even better or something more beautiful to attract people. When people see it, they marvel at it. But one of the ulama, they write that the masjid was supposed to be a refuge for the poor as well. And when they come to a place that is so beautiful, they feel like, this is not a place for me. They don't resonate with it. And then he says that spending such vast sums of money on the construction of the masjid, if the masjid is soulless and it doesn't have activity and it doesn't provide the spirit that the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam provided, then what's the point of these soulless, lifeless buildings if it doesn't provide that? So these are some discussions I just want to make you guys privy to, and these are some discussions that happened. Now, when did the construction begin? The construction of Uthman radiallahu anhu only took about 10 months. It was a 10-month renovation. Where was Janazah Salah offered? Janazah Salah would be offered sometimes at the home of the deceased, near their house. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would be called, and he would go there, and he would share with the family in their moment of grief, and he would offer Salatul Janazah. Sometimes the families would bring the deceased close to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's house, and they would offer it near his house, but not in the masjid. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu mentions this in Al-Bukhari. And based on that, Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi say that Salatul Janazah should not happen in the musalla, in the masjid. It should happen in another area. Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi, based on other narrations, says no, it can happen in the masjid too. So that's why you see differences amongst the fuqaha. Now some more details about the masjid. In the masjid of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whoever prays one salah there, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, they will receive 1,000, the rewards of 1,000 prayer. The reward of 1,000 prayers. So one salah in the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is equivalent to 1,000. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam's masjid was everything, not just a prayer space. And we're going to mention a few more things inshallah. Rawdah. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam's masjid, in the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam today, when you go, there's an area called the Rawdah. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Ma bayna mimbari wa qabri rawdatum min riyadil jannah, or ma bayna mimbari wa bayti baytum rawdatum min riyadil jannah." The area that is between the mimbar, the pulpit, and my house is a garden from the gardens of Jannah. What does that mean? Some ulama say it means because it's a place of dhikr, it's a place of salah, it's like a garden from the gardens of Jannah. But some ulama say no, it's actually a part of Jannah that Allah revealed on earth. And if you've ever stepped in the Rawdah before, you'll know exactly what this means. Because when you step in the Rawdah and you pray 2 rak'ah there, the feeling of praying in the Rawdah is almost, I would say, is unmatched. You can stand in front of Ka'batullah, it's beautiful, but standing in the Rawdah is you don't get the chance to do it much. And it's very special. May Allah allow us to do that, inshallah. So, the mihrab of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. What's a mihrab? Mihrab is this niche that you find here, the carved wall. Okay? So the mihrab of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wasn't built initially when they first constructed the Kaaba. I keep saying Kaaba. When they first constructed Masjid Nabawi, the niche was not built, it was built later. The mimbar of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. What is a mimbar? Mimbar is a pulpit. The pulpit that the Imam stands to deliver the sermon. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that my mimbar will be on the streams of Jannah and paradise. It had 3 steps. Very simple. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would stand on the highest step. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu felt it was disrespectful to stand on the highest step because the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam stood there. I'm not on his level. So he used to stand on the second one. Umar radiallahu anhu said, I'm not as good as Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So he used to stand on the first step. And Uthman radiallahu anhu used to stand on the floor. But then later on, Uthman radiallahu anhu started standing at the top. Because that's where the Imam should stand. Now, when Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam first started giving khutbah, he was leaning on a tree which is now known as the pillar of Hannana. Ustuwana Hannana. Hannana means a camel that cries, the crying of a camel. And the story is that once a woman came to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and said, Oh Rasulullah, we should build you a mimbar. You need to stand on a proper platform when you're giving the khutbah. So the community can see you, they can see you when you're addressing them, they can hear you properly. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave them permission. Now that palm tree was a little bit behind the niche, where the niche is today if you go there. Not the front of the masjid, because that wasn't there in Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's time. We were talking about the first construction. When Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam abandoned that palm tree and he started giving khutbah on the mimbar, on the newly designed and built mimbar, what happened? That date palm tree cried. And this is from the miracles of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam descended from the pulpit and consoled the trunk, embracing it and speaking to it gently. He offered it one of 2 choices and said, either I start using you again, or you can be a tree in Jannah and you will be quenched by the rivers of Jannah. What's your choice? And it chose to be a tree in Jannah. This is what the hadith mentioned. Many Sahaba radiallahu anhu actually witnessed this from Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Jabir radiallahu anhu narrates, it cried like a child and the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam descended and embraced it while it continued moaning like a child being quietened. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said it was crying for missing what it used to hear of dhikr near it. Why is it crying? Because the most compassionate and most beloved person was leaning on it. And the dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal was taking place near it, so it was weeping. Imam Shafi'i used to say, Allah never gave a prophet what he gave Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So somebody asked, he gave Isa alayhi salam the power to revive the dead. He said yes, but he gave Muhammad the moaning trunk by which he stood and delivered the khutbah until the mimbar was constructed. When the mimbar was placed, the trunk moaned until its sound could be heard, and this is greater than that. Hasan al-Basri rahmatullahi alayhi used to say, a piece of wood cries out of loving Rasulullah, O Muslims, you are more deserving to yearn to meet the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. If a piece of wood is crying because it's missing the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam leaning on it, our hearts should be crying and we should be yearning to meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that if I did not console this tree, it would have cried till Judgment Day. Subhanallah. We're going to stop here. There's more about the masjid. We're going to speak about the pillar of Aisha, the pillar of Abu Lubaba. We're going to speak about the benefits of the masjid. What are the benefits of a masjid? Because it's very important. Why Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam established masjid? We're going to speak a little bit about the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well, the importance of a masjid in an Islamic society and the state. And then we'll speak about mu'akhat, the fraternity that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam established. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.